Hi guys, welcome back to another digital painting tutorial where we will be painting this sepia forest landscape. Welcome to my channel, Creatively Me with Bree. Hopefully by the end of this tutorial, you'll have something that looks something like this. If you want to know what colors I used, you can find the hexadecimal codes down below in the description. Let's go over the dimensions and the color profile. First, let's go to the Actions tool, going to Canvas, Canvas information all the way down at the bottom. Here is where you can title your work and also sign your name if you would like. Under Dimensions, I have chosen 3800 pixels by 5000 pixels at 300 dpi. Under Color Profile, I have done one of the defaults, that's the word, second from the top of the options provided, and I hit Done. Alright, so we have the background, we have layer 1. The background is white. On layer 1, we are going to utilize this very, it's like a light blue. Oh, just kidding, it's like a light green. It always looks like blue to me, but I guess it's a grayish green. Come on, that looks so blue. Anyways, next we're going to add a new layer on top of this deceptively blue layer, which is actually green. We're going to pick the medium hard brush under airbrush in the brush library, and we're just going to paint that along the bottom portion. I move it down a little bit to make it so that it's 1/3 instead of, it was more like 2/3 before because of composition. Yeah. And then I use the Gaussian blur here so that it blends in with the background. Once I select this yellow-brown color, I go into my brush library and I go into inking and I select the Inka brush. Here's what the Inka brush looks like. And this is what we will be using in order to draw the trees that go in the background. These are actually more the middle ground because I do end up deciding to put a layer behind these, which end up becoming the actual background, but I think you get what I mean. And since nature and trees tend not to be perfectly straight, I'm making sure that I allow, some wiggle lines in there, just to have it feel a little bit more natural. Just to make sure there is some slight variation, I do also thicken up a few of the trees, for lack of a better word. I'm in a goofy mood today, guys. Bear with me. So now we're going to add a new layer, and then we're going to pick this color, which is another like yellowish gray, because I wanted it to be, lighter to blend more in with the background. We're going to move it underneath the layer that we were just creating, and now we're going to create some more trees that go in the background. Make sure that you add, just some slight variations at the bottom of the trees, and you don't want them to all look identical. Now we're going to add a new layer, and on this new layer, we're going to select in Organics the Rainforest brush. We're going to duplicate it, and we're just going to make the spacing and the jitter a little bit bigger. Those are the settings. Hit done. And now I'm going to start creating some texture on the ground. Hopefully it looks in time like, maybe some dried leaves, some dirt, debris, something. I am making this size a little bit smaller as I'm heading back towards the furthest part of the land, so the details are a bit smaller because, perspective and all that. I'm not overdoing the details simply because I do want it to feel like there's like fog sort of happening in the background, so we don't have to be too worried about details standing out and being precise. Next, we're going into the artistic, and we're going to grab Leatherwood. Now, I am currently working on the middle ground trees and just trying to soften up some of the more blunt looking lines and base of the trees. As you can tell, I zoom in and out often just to make sure everything is registering and reading correctly from afar as well as up close. I know this part's really exhilarating. It's going to be boring for a while, guys, but this would be a good time for you to work on your stuff alongside me in awkward silence. In hindsight, I should have sped through this part. Oh, here we are. Now, I'm going to put that layer on Alpha Lock, and I'm going to make sure I'm on the correct color, which is that one, and I'm going to choose something a bit darker, like that. And now, I'm going to use the leather wood with the opacity around 30 and the size around 2%. And I am going to add in bark-like texture. Leatherwood is probably my favorite in terms of tree bark. I am, however, probably a bit biased because I absolutely love this brush. It's so versatile. And I'm not covering all of the trees with the texture. I'm just sort of focusing mostly on the base and then just tapping it in upward as it heads towards the top of the trees. But I'm not putting too much focus, just enough to suggest that the tree is in fact not flat and one-dimensional. This tree is a good example of what I mean. See? It's not flat anymore. It has color and texture and depth. Thankfully, we are almost done with this part. And then we're going to repeat this on the next layer in a moment here, the one underneath it. But you'll see, we'll get there. I'm going to go to like I said, the background layer. I'm going to go back to my smudge tool like we did with the first into Leatherwood, and I'm going to try and soften up some of the harsher lines of these trees so they look just a bit more natural before I start painting texture on them. I am about to add a new color, one that I did not originally have in my palette because I realized I needed one more. So you see me struggle here, don't worry. The hexadecimal code is down in the description so you don't have to figure it out like I did. Be sure to put that layer on Alpha Lock so that when you go to draw on the texture like you see me doing here, it'll stay on the tree and not go anywhere else. I know it doesn't look great right now, but just trust the process. I promise, it gets better. Heading back into our layers, we are going to select the layer beneath the trees and hit the plus sign to create a new layer. Make sure that we have our selected, it's like a brown yellow, and we are going to the rainforest brush, which you can find under organics, and I'm going to just lightly paint in some of that lighter color and texture into the background where the background trees are hanging out. Again, I probably could have sped this part up, but you're here with me now. Hi. Thank you for your patience. I don't worry too much about the left-hand side just because I am going to add a tree there in a few moments. Heading back into my layers, I'm going to select layer 2 and then add a layer above that, which is now layer 7. And I'm going to grab the cotton brush and this nice medium orange. And I'm just going to gently brush in, sort of just, it's like a shape definer, a nice background sort of suggestion of leaves without detail. I just combined layer 5 and 6 together, just so they were all in the same layers, that I could just very slightly use the Gaussian blur to take out some of the detail. Selecting layer 5, we press the plus sign and add a new layer on top of it. It does say that it's layer 7, so now we have 2 layer 7s. You can totally rename them if that will help you keep better track of things. I'm not, but you certainly can. This color is one of the lightest of the yellow-brown colors that we work in, and it's just offering a little bit of color variation to the leaves, starting to create just a little bit of actual leaves, and also the suggestion of specific type of lighting, which we will continue to work on throughout the piece. Back under layers, we are going to be on layer 7, make it an alpha lock, and select it's one of the redder of the colors. And now that it's on alpha lock, it means that when you paint, it's only going to appear on the layer that it's locked onto. And I'm just trying to get some leaf color variation. Going down in our layers to layer 2, I'm going to hit the plus sign, and we're going to get what's now layer 8. Grab one of the dark browns, and I'm using the rainforest brush where the size is pushed up quite a bit because I want to just get some more texture as well as leaves in the background. Now I'm going to put the blending mode on soft light so that it's still there, but it's also a very nice, subtle, rather than stark addition. This piece has a lot of textures, so we want to be careful not to have too many of the textures competing for our attention. On this new layer, we are going into the airbrush, the medium hard brush, and we're using it to create this kind of large yellow circle, and we're going to use the Gaussian blur to soften it up. And we're going back to the layer 9, and we are going to just take the opacity down to around 60%. I end up going to the most background of the trees, taking off the alpha lock, and going into my smudge tool and leatherwood because I noticed there were just some areas that I still needed to soften up and just, touch up that I didn't do before. Heading back into layers, select layer 3, add a new layer by hitting the plus sign, grab the darkest of the colors, and then we want to make sure we're still on leatherwood and make sure that the opacity is all the way up. And here you go. So now we're going to be painting one of the closer trees, the foreground tree. And I'm using the leatherwood because, as I've said before, I love that it has such a wonderful texture. It really has like a nice bark-like effect. And it also has some really nice like color variation in it. You can't see it until you're, more zoomed in or up close, but I also really appreciate that about the brush. If you struggle with making trees, or you feel like your trees never quite have like the right structure, just make sure that you're using a reference. Reference is so important for learning. It's also just important in general as an artist. So there's that. Right now I'm just using the eraser. I'm using the Inca brush as my eraser and still using leatherwood to continue to get the shape and the texture that I would like out of this tree. Now going back into layers, I am going to put this on alpha lock so that now any color that I choose, which is that one, um, to draw on top of this tree will stay on there. So now I'm adding more texture to the bark and more color variation. I grab some of the colors that have already been sort of created by combining these two colors and just slowly work it into the base of this tree, working my way up along the front because I do want there to be, grooves. Yeah, like you can see right there. That suggests that the bark is, it's barking, for lack of a better word. All right, and now we're going to do across the top here. So add a new layer. This will be layer 11 or 12, depending on if you renamed yours. And I'm going to use this orange, and I'm going to use the Aurora brush under Artistic. I'm going to duplicate it and make a slight variation. I would like to amend the brush just a bit. So first we want to make sure the spacing and the jitter is a little bit bigger. We're also going to go into dynamic under jitter and size because I want there to be size variation. Next, go into color dynamic, and I'm going to take out all of these except the hue. The hue we're going to keep it around, I think 6%, 4%. I'm just kidding. Done. Now, I just have to figure out what size I would like to paint it at. Might take you a few tries. It took me a few tries to figure out what size I needed everything to be at to get the leaves that I wanted out of this. All right, and now we can go back into layers. We're going to click on that layer, put it on alpha lock, and now we're going to choose some color variations that we're still using the Aurora brush, the amended one, and we're just adding in some color variation with what's already there. Heading to layer 3, we are going to add a new layer on top. We are going to go into the lightest yellow color that we use on this piece, and I'm going to make the blending mode add. Now, under brushes, I'm going into airbrush and using the medium brush, which has a very nice soft edge. And I'm just going to use that to start to create this sense of light coming through at the top of the trees here. It might be hard to register, but it is there. I'm making the brush smaller, and now I am just starting to create little bits of sun rays. I make the brush just a little bit smaller and then continue to build in a few more rays of sunshine or light coming through. So now we're going to have to adjust the floor or the ground. And so on a new layer above that one, I'm also going to put that in add, stay on the same color, and I'm going to go to the rainforest brush and start getting some of that lighter color painted in to where the light would be hitting and reflecting off the leaves. Now I'm starting to build up that color a little bit more. I'm not entirely pleased with the way this looks, so I do go into the smudge tool and grab the leather wood brush and just try to soften up some of the areas that seem overly concentrated with this particular add blending mode on. Now we're going to add a new layer, layer 14, above the layer that we were just working on. We're going to pick this orange color and we're going to use that to now add in some color variation around the leaves that are highlighted. We also want to start to bring that color forward towards us just a little bit. I'm going back now to my tree layer, the most background, no, the one on top of the most background, the midground. And I'm just smudging out some of these, the tops of these trees where the lines are just still a little too harsh and stand out too much. All right, so now we're going to go to the tree and add a new layer. We're going to use that yellow again, and we're going to put this on add like we did with the previous layers for creating this highlight effect. We're going down to the hard airbrush, putting the size and the opacity down. And it might be a little difficult to see, but I am going in and just adding some highlights around these leaves. I'm also drawing in some branches. And I know it's a little difficult to capture this and really see it for what it looks like in person on this camera, but just know it really does show up in person. I think it shows better in my photographs of this piece, so maybe you can tell there a little bit better what it's supposed to look like. I feel like this is the point where the project really starts to take off, where you really start to feel the light. you know, I'm sure you can see I am pushing the light quite a bit. But I think for this piece, like that was the highlight. I want the highlight of this piece to be the lighting itself. I want the lighting to be the focus. All right, and now that we've got our tree highlighted, we're going to do the smaller trees because the smaller trees are definitely going to be grabbing more of this bright lighting. I'm just adding some additional like leaf details now. So on another new layer, making sure it's on add, I am going to push the light just a little bit more because I am determined to really push the lighting on this piece. All right, once I like it, or at least mostly like it, I go back into my layers. I select layer 8 and then I hit the plus sign. So there's a layer now above layer 8. And I'm going to choose the second darkest brown. And I'm going to use the Aurora amended brush that we made. And I'm going to create on the side here just some more up close. I guess you call it maybe a bush, maybe a short tree. Who knows? But there's leaves. There's leaves. And I also create some over here as well. I decided to move it up because it was getting hidden behind some of the other textures that I had made. Now I'm going to resize because I just thought it was taking up too much of the space and the light there. I do the same with this. I squish it. There we go. And now I'm going to use the smudge tool just to soften up some of these edges in the background there. Now on layer 18, I'm going to put the clipping mask on. Layer 18 are the leaves that we just made, by the way. And I am going to use the Aurora brush again, the amended one, and that'll allow me to put some various darker leaves in there without painting outside of that shape that we already created. I'm going to go back to one of the layers I already used for the highlights and just continue to utilize that, going back into my hard airbrush and just add in some highlights in areas now that we've added these leaves. All right, so we want to choose the darkest brown, and actually we're going to make it like basically black. And I'm going to Organics Rainforest brush that we amended, and I'm just going to make the foreground here just a touch darker. And now I believe we are on the final step, which means we're going to grab these leaves, the foreground leaves. I'm going to use the freehand selection tool. I'm going to use the feather. Now I'm going to do invert. Go over to adjustments, color dynamics, which will be hue, saturation, and brightness. And I'm going to take the brightness down and the saturation down a touch as well, just so that the leaves are a little bit darker around the non-lit area. And here's the final product. Thank you guys so much for sitting with me through this entire project. I apologize if some of the steps were hard to follow. I'm still trying to get better about it. I promise I'm working on it. If you haven't yet subscribed, please do. And I look forward to seeing you at the next tutorial. Bye guys!